Hello, OHR managers. Last year, each of you collaborated with your senior leaders and invested a lot of time to make meaningful improvements within our organization. And I really feel that your effort is truly paying off, and I think the results are showing it. This year, DSIM had enough respondents to be separately reflected in the presentation, bringing us closer to having all of our divisions and offices represented. I mentioned this as a reminder to continue encouraging your teams to share their feedback. Remind them of the initiatives and tactics put in place to make improvements within OHR, within your division, and especially within your immediate teams. Our scores remain very high, but to sustain and enhance these results, we need to address the nuanced needs across the divisions. To understand these areas better, their feedback is essential, giving us that data we can analyze and act upon. All of the questions remain the same compared to last year, so to start us off, I will share some of our high-level accomplishments. Across all 90 survey questions, the average change for OHR was a 1% increase, so in general, perceptions are moving in a positive direction. 14 questions improved between 3 and 9%, and only 2 questions out of the 90 had significant decreases, and they both dropped by 5%. I'll share more about them later in the presentation, but of these 14 improved questions, 5 improved by 3%, 3 increased by 4%, 2 improved by 5%, 2 increased by 6%, 1 improved by 7%, and then 1 question saw a huge increase of 9%. And this question was, I feel a strong personal attachment to my organization. All of our categories, indices, and sub-indices either experienced no change and held consistent or saw improvements. I highlighted equity as an opportunity for the last 2 years due to the spread between the divisions and lower average scores. The sub-index is up 3% compared to 2023. And then lastly, we saw significant improvements in the number of questions scoring below 80%, which is our threshold for identifying areas of opportunity. Last year, there were 9 questions in the 70% range, and this year we reduced that to only 4. For response rates, in the top right-hand corner, I have the rates for the groups in our organizational hierarchy, and OHR is still holding the top spot with a 77% response rate. NIH set a goal of 75%, and as you can see, majority of the divisions either met or exceeded that goal. All of the divisions exceeded NIH's actual rate of 66% by between 6 and 34%. Some of the divisions took some dips, but overall, OHR is staying pretty consistent. OHR's response rate has stayed between 76 and 81% for the past 5 survey years. And for WRD, the 10% drop is due to the increase in the number of surveys administered. The actual number of respondents stayed the same as last year. So on the left, you can see that our BIA score inched up another percentage point, giving us a new record high. We exceeded the NIH goal by 15% and their actual score by 16%. And then on the right, you can see that there were some increases and some decreases among the divisions, but everyone exceeded the NIH goal of 70% by between 2 and 30%. Next, I will go over our category scores. As I mentioned in the accomplishment slide, all of our categories either stayed consistent with 2023 or showed some level of improvement. Work experience was 87% with no change. Work unit came in at 91% positive with a 2% increase. Organization was 90% positive with a 2% increase. Supervisor, 93% positive with a 1% increase. Leadership came in at 89% positive with no change. And satisfaction came in at 85% positive with a 3% increase. One win I want to highlight this year is that my satisfaction improved by 3%. And this contains the pay satisfaction question, which has historically been pretty low. This year, that question jumped up by 6%, bringing it to 82% positive. And then satisfaction with involvement in decisions that affect your work has also been a challenge over the last few surveys, and it jumped up 6% as well, coming in at 81% positive. This slide highlights the spreads between the lowest and highest division average category scores, with it focusing on the range of scores rather than individual values for each division. The goal is to see small spreads which would reflect more consistent perceptions across divisions. So we know the goal is to reduce our spreads, but as you can see on the right, in some cases the spreads increase slightly. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing because this is mainly due to improvements in our highest average scores. So I want to highlight those changes instead of solely focusing on the spreads. Across all categories except for my supervisor, both the highest and lowest average scores saw improvement, with several of them being significant of 3% or more. In my supervisor, our lowest score is still strong despite that 2% drop, while our top score hit 100%. And then lastly, satisfaction is now the only category with a division average score below 80%. But that division saw a 3% improvement, and the question negatively impacting their score is the pay satisfaction question. Next, I'm going to move on to our indices. For our core indices, in the top right-hand corner, you all will see the 2024 Index NIH goals in blue and then the actual NIH scores in red. Our EEI score of 91% was a 1% improvement from last year and exceeded the NIH goal by 7%, and their actual score by 8%. All of the sub-indices held strong or saw small increases compared to last year. GSI came in at 88% with a 2% increase, and none of the questions declined. We were one rounded percentage point off from the NIH goal, but exceeded their actual score by 10%. PCI had a score of 96% positive, which has been our score since it was created in 2020. And then lastly, EXI improved by 4%, coming in at 89% positive. This index beat the NIH goal by 3%. We beat their actual score by 4%, saw improvements for every single question, and then had 2 questions with the largest improvement in the entire survey. These 2 questions were, my job inspires me, and I feel a strong personal attachment to my organization. For our division indices, you can see that for our EEI and GSI, there were a lot of improvements and a few decreases. The dark blue bar represents the OD score, with its actual data values displayed inside it. The white dashed line indicates OIMP's results with its data label shown on the outside of the OD bar. Keep in mind that OCS is also included in the calculation of OD's score, but isn't shown separately. This is why the changes in OIMP's results may differ from those in the overall OD score. So as you look through these scores, there are 2 questions I would highlight as potential opportunities because 3 or more divisions had scores of less than 80%. And those are, how good of a job do you feel is being done by the manager directly above your immediate supervisor? And then my talents are used well in the workplace. Both of these fall within the EEI. And then the only question negatively impacting the GSI is still just the pay question. These are the division PCI and EXI scores. As you can see, we mostly saw improvements across the board. The only questions with scores below 80% were within the EXI and are actually the 2 most improved questions I mentioned before. And then another improvement for EXI is that we had 14 questions below 80% in 2023 among all of the divisions, and this year we're down to just 5. OHR's overall DEIA score came in at 91% positive with a 3% increase. We exceeded the NIH goal by 8% and their actual score by 9%. As mentioned on the accomplishment slide, all of our sub-indices experience increases as well. And as you look through the data shared on the screen, I want to provide a bit more information regarding our improvements in this index. Every DEIA question improved except for 2 that were already at 90% or higher. Last year, I pointed out the question, I am comfortable expressing opinions that are different from other employees in my work unit as an area for improvement since it had a drop of 3%. This year, it's trending back up with a rounded up 2% increase. And then 4 DEIA questions were included in the most improved group that I previously mentioned. On the left-hand side of the slide, you all will see the individual division and office overall DEIA scores. On the right, I have displayed the spreads, like how I did for the categories. I've included the changes to the lowest scores in blue, as well as the changes to the overall spreads in orange. We had so many improvements in this index, but just to highlight a few, last year overall, there were a total of 11 questions with scores below 80%, and this year we cut that number to almost in half with only 6 questions across all of the divisions. Across all DEIA questions, the lowest division score was a 75% positive, which is a significant improvement from 2022 when the index was first established. At that time, we had scores that dropped into the 40s. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, all minimum division scores improved by at least 3%. There were no sub-index scores below 80%, and there were spread decreases across all sub-indices. And then lastly, question 80, I am comfortable expressing my opinions that are different from other employees in my work unit. Even though this question improved on the OHR level, it is still the only DEIA question I would highlight as an opportunity, since it still has a 25% spread and 3 divisions had scores below 80%. So something for you all to think about. Moving on to our last section to go over our strengths and opportunities. At the beginning, I mentioned that we had 14 questions with significant improvements. This slide is to show what those questions are. The ones with the asterisk beside them are the questions that were previously below 80% positive. And then at the bottom, these are the only 2 questions in the entire survey that had significant decreases at the OHR level. Perceptions mainly shifted to neutral as our negative scores still remained very low. For those 2 questions, their scores across divisions were still pretty high as well, even though there were some decreases and very few scores below 80%. I wouldn't necessarily highlight these as opportunities right now, but something to keep in mind. Every year, I always highlight our top performing questions, and this year we have 11 questions scoring above 95%, which is up from 7 last year. I've annotated the 4 new additions, and of these 11, 8 improved compared to last year, 2 stayed the same, and then 1 saw a small 2% drop, which is the one at the bottom. In previous years, I have always separated the highest neutrals and lowest positives to display as opportunities, but this year only 4 questions scored below 80%, compared to 9 in 2023. 2 of these had no change in their positive score, which are the 2 shown at the top, and then 2 saw small increases in their positive scores, which are the 2 shown at the bottom. The 5 other questions I highlighted last year all improved and scored above 80%, and there were no new questions that are added to this category. As for high neutral scores, the threshold is 15% or more, and we're down to just 1 question, which is a big drop from 4 in 2023, and then we had a total of 8 in 2022. This question is differences in performance are recognized in a meaningful way, located in the bottom left-hand corner. And then lastly, this is a quick historical glance at 2 of our opportunities mentioned on the last slide. The other 2 questions were only added last year, so there isn't much more context to share for them. But as you can see, although these questions still remain below 80% positive, they have been making small incremental improvements, and remaining steady in challenging areas is just as big of an accomplishment as seeing increases. So job well done, OHR.